Welcome to Growing Up in Easton, a series to preserve Easton's past and make it available to future generations. My name is Priscilla Almquist-Olsen. I'll be your host today, and my guests are Bob Alger, Oliver Ames High School, class of 1946, and his lovely wife Jean Alger, maiden name?
Southworth.
Southworth. Jean Southworth Alger. How could I forget? Oliver Ames, class of 1947. Welcome, Bob. Welcome, Jean. Thanks for coming and sharing. So why don't we start with Jean. What are your earliest remembrances of growing up in Easton?
I was born in a farmhouse on Pine Street, Eastondale, we always called it, and it was number 55 at the time. Then as the houses were more built on Pine Street, then they renumbered. Now that is number 87, and we've lived there. I was there for 20 years and then moved next door in 1950 when we were married. We've been married since 1950.
Well, Bob, how was that like, growing up next to your in-laws? I mean, not growing up, but I mean married and living next to your in-laws.
Well, I thought it was very interesting. I didn't know at the time when I was growing up who I would be going with and to marry.
Uh-huh.
And when I began work, I worked at Simpson Spring for a short time, and her grandfather was my boss.
Oh.
Yeah, he kept things under control. That's what his job was for the young boys, young whippersnappers, we were called.
Right.
Yeah, so little did I realize that I would be married to her. She used to walk by. I was born in the house at 35 Pine Street, and that's before you get, it's south of the Eastondale School.
Uh-huh.
And we used to sit out on the sidewalk, which, oh no, it wasn't, it was just a walkway. And when the boys were at one end of Pine Street, the girls were at the other end. And they used to walk by to get down to a little store down there known as Fuller's Little Variety Store for ice cream, candy, and whatnot. And we used to be there out in front of the house sitting down, a group of us, and when the girls walked by, why, we used to go woo-hoo. And but little did we realize, we weren't mean or anything, but that was it.
So did you spot Jean Southworth walking by?
Oh yes, at that time, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I knew she was a Southworth because I used to deliver Sunday papers to her house where she lived, and all those years, a lot of years. And
So you have just moved a few doors down, and your whole life has been on Pine Street in Eastondale.
right.
So Jean, tell us about growing up in, must have gone to the Eastondale School.
Yes,
What
we
was
went
that
to
like?
Eastondale School for 6 years. I lived right near there, so we walked home for lunch and back to school. And they had the playground, and kids came from all around. They had a nice playground with giant stride, slide, and swings. And we met a lot of friends from West Bridgewater because they weren't far from us. We're near the West Bridgewater line. And so they used to come to Eastondale School, and the boys played baseball. And so we became friendly with a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a lot of friends, a lot of girlfriends lived right around us and grew up together.
Have they stayed in town?
There's only one left right near us. The rest have passed.
Mm-hmm. So one of your earliest remembrances of being in the classroom in the Eastondale School?
I really liked school a lot. We had Miss Mildred J. O'Connor lived on Center Street in Northeastern, and we had first, second, and third grade in one room. She was our teacher. And then 4th and 5th was in the other room, and Florence Harris was the teacher there. And the year I was in 4th grade, 5th grade, I guess it was, they built the new room on the back of the school, so then it was 2 grades in each school, each room. And Miss Harris was our principal, and she went on to do 5th and 6th grade. A lot of friends that over the years.
Do you remember any special events or funny happenings?
Yes, we used to have a play occasionally. It would be in the evening so the parents could come. And one night, one of the little guys fell sound asleep before it was his time to go on the play. One of the plays was fun. We dressed as a carrot, a beet, a bunch of celery for health. It was mainly to teach us about the health, eating our vegetables.
Yeah, eating your vegetables. And Bob, I hope you weren't guilty of not eating your vegetables.
No, I don't think I was.
You liked your vegetables, right?
Oh, I did.
Yeah, and what else did you like about Eastondale School and being in the classrooms there? Do you remember?
Well, I remember my last name, of course, was Alger A. And you always had what, a front seat?
Oh, I know, because my name is Almquist, and I was AL.
Yeah.
Also, first seat.
Yeah, and it wasn't
Front
until
row.
about the 6th grade that I was allowed to go up and sit in the back seat on the outside row where I could look like this out the window, you know, and see and hear the trains go by down there.
Yep.
There's a track that takes them to West Bridgewater at that time.
Oh.
And no, I used to be in a couple of the plays too. And
What were you, a carrot?
I was Carrot Top, they used to call me.
Is that
Because
right?
I had red hair.
Oh, how did I envision that? How did I guess that? Oh, what do you know?
There were I had 2 brothers,
Uh-huh.
and they were older than I was, and we were all redheads.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't really a red, it was more like an auburn color.
Yeah?
And they used to call us Carrot Top and all.
Yeah, sure. Well, imagine, Gene, that was an attractive thing. A man with auburn hair, it's always an attraction, wouldn't you say?
Well, honestly, there were several boys, and there were several that I liked, but I'm thankful I ended up with him.
Yeah, well, I bet you are. He's a sweetheart. So, when you left Easton, oh, by the way, when you were in the Eastondale School, and you had 2 and sometimes 3 grades in one classroom, did the older children help the younger ones? How did that work?
Yes, especially I remember in 1st grade, they would take the 1st graders up front, and each one brought their own little chairs to sit for reading, because the others would be busy doing whatever, their math or whatever, but she would take each class up for separate work.
I see. And Bob, was that your experience too? Do you remember?
Oh yeah, we used to have spelling bees. And
Oh.
she would pick different ones from the class and have us stand against the one wall, and she would ask us to spell this, spell that. And the same for math she would do.
Mm-hmm.
And that was Miss Harris. I think Miss O'Connor did it too. And one thing I remember, which was great, we used to have a break time every morning and have a carton of milk and some cookies. And that was real good. Really
Another
good.
thing to remember in school, we always had to have clean fingernails, and we would have to show our clean fingernails and a clean hanky, and we would get the little Campbell Soup kid sticker on a paper to show we had. But that was important for cleanliness.
Yeah, sure. And important so that disease wasn't spread.
Right.
Yeah, very good. So did you do a lot of singing in the school?
Yes, and we had piano, and that's something that they don't seem to have of what I've spoken to some of the young people. But we had special singing time, and the teacher would play the piano to play and so many, even adults, haven't learned how to sing a particular tune, and because they didn't have it in school.
So those were fun days, weren't they, Bob?
Oh, sure. You know, when we had time, recess time, to go out and play. All right. What was it? You had a flag or a piece of cloth, and you threw it, and if somebody didn't catch it, somebody else had the chance to go pick it up on either side. And you know, then we could have kickball. Of course, I suppose it was soccer now. And we had a lot of fun. Of course, growing up there at night after school, we'd go home and get out of our school clothes and put on some play clothes and go back up, and the boys would be there, and we'd pick up football teams on the old side lawn, or baseball down in the field. And then that's when, like Gene said, that the boys from West Bridgewater would come over, and and there were some older fellas that came along to help us pick teams and stuff too on Saturdays. And if there weren't enough to even the teams up, each one of them, one team, would have one person on it bigger than what we were, and the ones that could hit the ball pretty good over the school, which was great.
Did you ever break any windows?
Oh yes, we did. And then they finally put on screens over the windows.
Oh.
You know, but I never broke any.
No, of course not.
No, I didn't. I used to put it to the side lawn, and then would trickle perhaps go across Pine Street. But
There was another fun thing that they did, especially at recess, was to play alleys. We had the marbles and dig a little hole in the sand, and one of the girls, Evelyn McNeil, was the champion all the time. The boys couldn't get over that. They were upset that they weren't the champions, but she was great at the playing alleys.
And that's with marbles?
yeah.
Right.
Okay.
But it was called playing alleys, but they were marbles, and you'd collect, and the one that had the most would be the winner.
So
Have a little bag of alleys.
So she was doing her feminist part even back then. Good. Well, so you eventually left Eastondale School, and which schools did you go to?
We went to Lincoln Street, to the old Oliver Ames High School for 6 more years, because the junior high was all at the south end and the high school was at the north end. So we went there for 6 years.
You're talking about the south end and north end of the building?
Yes.
Right. And for those people who don't know, it's now, it's called the Yellow Brick Building on Lincoln, opposite the Rockery. And it's apartments, been converted to apartments. And the YMCA uses the gym for programs in the back, and all 7th through 12th grades were there, even when I was there some years later. And I think that made it possible for us to really get to know students who were 5 years older than we. So it wasn't until many years later that high school was 9 to 12 in a separate building.
Not only that, one of my recollections is of Hazel Varela. She was in junior high when I was in high school, but she was always going to the library with her arm full of books. She just loved to read. And look where she is today, historian, history teacher.
Yeah, oh, that's interesting. So you have a memory of her loaded down with books.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and of course, for those of you who don't know, Hazel Varela is one of our two-town historians. She has written many publications about Easton's history, and she is a magnificent speaker, and she goes into such detail without notes. It is truly amazing to hear her. So if you have a chance to listen to one of her presentations, by all means, take advantage of that. You will not be disappointed. And she's still teaching. She's, I believe, in her early 80s already. Doesn't look it, doesn't act it. But she's still a professor of history at Curry College, and leads a very active life. And we're so happy that you remember her with all those books.
Right.
Wow. And so what happened in junior high that was different, Bob, from the Eastondale School?
Well, I remember out in the corridors that they had what they call guards standing out in the corridors to make sure you didn't go around them. You had to stay to the right of them and go circle them around to your next study room and so forth. If you didn't, you were reported that you couldn't follow the rules. But I always tried to follow the rules, and I tried to make the guards. So I tried. The day I tried out, one boy personally took the wrong side, and I grabbed him, said, "No, this is the way you go." And I was called into the principal's office and said, "That's not the way you handle it. You bring the handling to me." And that was Mr. Regan, the principal of the junior high.
I see.
So there were some changes there, you know, that was altogether different than being down in the first 6 grades.
Yeah, and you also, didn't you go from one classroom to another?
Yes. Yeah, from homeroom you'd go maybe to your art class or music class or history. Mr. Whitten was the history teacher, I believe. Miss Collins was music, and she was my homeroom on 9th grade. And Miss O'Connor was my homeroom teacher in the 7th grade upstairs. And
what are some of the memories you have about the teachers and how they conducted themselves and how they cared about their students?
Well, they made you hold the line. You're in there to study, not to fool around.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I was told to come back a couple of nights to study, and I said, "I'm sorry, I've got to leave. I'm not going to walk home. My father pays taxes for me to ride the bus." And that was kind of a little interesting thing to Mr. Splain. I was supposed to go back to him one night. I did. I went back, but I told him I was taking the bus home. So I left. When it was time for my bus to come the next day, he said, "You're coming back tonight." I said, "Okay, but I'm still taking the bus home and I have to leave." And that's the way it was.
And he respected you for that. So, Jean, what sorts of extracurricular activities did you find at the high school, the junior high and high school, that weren't available in the elementary school?
I especially enjoyed the choir, singing with older people that we learned. Like I went to school with Nancy Sullivan, was in my class, and then her sister, Mary Beth, I became friendly with because even though she was 2 or 3 years ahead, we sang together, and that was one of the things I liked. And in school, I really liked math with Miss Healy, had her several times, and Miss Foster was hard. She was the
yes.
English teacher, and I hated oral topics, and I would get butterflies in my stomach, and I said, "I can't do this." And to this day, I'm not easy with speaking out.
Well, I remember Miss Foster also. She was my English teacher. She was my inspiration to go on and major in English in college. And she was very strict, and there was never a peep in that class. So she really made you work hard. But she also was very liberal with her compliments. If you did a good job, you got praise from her, and really her praise was so valued, don't you think?
And what we learned was when we had a strict teacher, that's when we really learned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one thing that she was strict about also was grammar. And wouldn't you agree, Jean?
Right. Yeah, I really enjoyed English classics, except for the oral topics.
I remember those. Yeah, we all got butterflies when we had to stand up. But she was very strict with the grammar. And I noticed today that even adults who didn't have that strict grammar background, make many, many errors. And it's unfortunate that somehow we've forgotten the basic English grammar and utilizing it.
I think one of the things they don't have today in school is like the home ec, the sewing, the cooking, I enjoyed Miss Grant, and then even my daughter Nancy had her as Mrs. O'Connell, and it was interesting to see, and I really, really liked her. I like sewing.
Well, you may be delighted to hear that there is, in the 7th and 8th grade, they do have home economics.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, and part of it is sewing, but it's also cooking, because, you know, today's young people really need to have these skills because they are independent when they finish school and so forth. And I've substituted some of those classes, and they're lots of fun. The kids enjoy them.
And we had it in high school too, the home ec. I took home ec, and I took bookkeeping. That was my favorite, and that's what I did after school.
Did you have Miss Carter?
Yes. Yes.
And what did you think of her?
We learned.
Wasn't she wonderful? She was absolutely wonderful. And do you know that she is still alive today? She is, I believe, 106.
At least, I think I read that recently.
Yes,
Yeah.
and she was our class advisor. And but I owe my ability to type so quickly to Miss Carter,
Right.
Mrs. Carter. She
Right.
was amazing. And my fingers fly. I don't even think about where they are. They just fly. And that was because she was very, very strict. We did this over and over and over until it became second nature to us.
And because I liked those subjects, I went to Williams Business School for a year before I went out to work as a bookkeeper.
Wonderful. And how about you, Bob? What were some of the special skills that you learned that helped you in your future career job?
What they call the woodworking shop with Mac McLeod.
Mm-hmm.
That was very interesting. And first you'd start out with 2 blocks of wood. You had to make a joint that would fit tight. And you used a hand saw and chisels and a hammer. You couldn't use the machinery, not until you had more experience with him, because he had those big table saws and so forth to cut wood. And I didn't graduate. I left school in my sophomore year. I was working on a poultry farm part-time right after school, and he lost his man to the draft that he had working full-time for him, so he asked me if I could work full-time, and I said, well, I'm in school. I took a few days off from school, and I got called down to the superintendent's office, and he asked me if I would like to leave school and go to work full-time because it was on a farm. I said, sure. And I was ready to leave school then, and he gave me papers from my mother and father to sign for the state, and they allowed me to leave at the age of 15.
Wow.
And so I started there and worked there for 3 years, and then I went to work at Simpson Spring when I turned 16. Worked there for 6 years, I believe it was. Then I went to work at Boston Gear down in North Quincy, 16 years, and I left there and came to work for Astro Gear in Brockton. I worked there for 26 years, and I retired in 94. I believe it was 1994. At the age of 64, I retired. But I'm still part-time work as custodian at the church near the center depot there. That
The Congregational Church.
Congregational Church, yes.
Good.
And,
And is that the church you go to too?
Right, and
Yeah.
I'm church secretary a couple mornings a week. So.
Yeah. Well, I know the
So we
Southworths
keep
have been a
busy.
family that has supported that church from the probably the very beginning.
Well, the Southworths worked at Simpson Spring, I think every generation. My grandfather, of course, worked there, as Bob has said, and I had 2 uncles that were salesmen. One uncle was a truck driver, and my cousin Sid still works there delivering water. He should be getting ready to retire.
Wow. So you mentioned, Bob, that you took the position on the farm of somebody who was called up in the draft. Now that was right in the middle of the World War II, wasn't it?
because that was I can't remember the year.
Probably
I went down there.
1943.
Yes, I think I was, because I left there in '46 on the farm. And his name was Tony Souza, Anthony Souza.
Oh, sure.
And there's up there at Central Street, I think there's a sign that says Anthony Souza Square.
Yes,
because he
right.
lived in a house next to Mitchell's store.
And he died in that war.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and you both remember the Depression, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
And
When-
growing up in the Depression, let's talk a little bit about that.
When
Yeah.
we were little, everybody was poor at today's standards. But we all were in the same boat, and we enjoyed life. We didn't hear things that happen. Like today, you hear things and see things on TV that happen in an instant. We didn't have all those things to think about. We were kids, happy kids, growing up and playing, roller skating. We used to roller skate on the street because there weren't that many cars. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, yeah. And so you were prevented from hearing all the bad things. And,
Right.
And as kids, you grew up and enjoyed your childhood and all those happy times
Right.
that you created together. Because really, you were very independent, weren't you?
We rode bikes on the street. They weren't as busy as they are today. The cars go so fast.
Right. And Bob, today kids are, you know, so sheltered in a way, and they're so, parents are, they call them helicopter parents now. They hover over their kids. They can't seem to get off the bus and walk to their house anymore. And we all know that life is not as idyllic as it was, but I'm sure that there were bad people back then too. And what kids today are losing a lot of the independence and self-sufficiency that we enjoyed, and we were nurtured by that. And how was it? Do you remember being independent as a kid?
Independent? I don't think it was independent. My mother, when my father, of course, worked at Mitchell's store, he was a grocery salesman, had to stay in the yard until your father gets home. Because if you didn't, you wait till he does get home. And the boys in the neighborhood would always get together sometimes and go down to what they called the Souls. The Souls used to live on Pine Street across from Fuller's store, and the father allowed us to play football in their backyard. But it's 4:30. When he got through at Simpson Spring, we had to be out, and because the mother was getting their supper ready. And we were told, you can't leave your yard, but I used to climb a fence. The neighbors had fences, so I would climb my neighbor's fence that was on the right of the house, go down through their backyard, climb another one, and then I'd be down at my cousin's house, the Walkers, down on Pine Street, where we used to have it, because they were growing pigs, and I used to like to feed them and stuff, you know. And so it was good.
Was that during the Depression, wasn't it?
Yes.
Now, a lot of people had pigs and other animals to survive. Tell us a little bit about that, Jane.
Well, my Uncle Steve Southworth lived also in the house with my grandparents, and he'd either have turkeys at one time, he had pigs often, and chickens, and because they needed them to eat.
Right.
And
so people were very resourceful.
right. And they had apple orchard. We had an apple orchard, so you'd have your apples.
And you'd always have a vegetable garden.
Yeah.
Right. They had
Yes.
a big garden, both my grandfather and my uncle. Yeah.
And how did they preserve food to carry them over the winter?
We've talked about that before.
Pressure cooker.
Yeah, we don't remember that so much.
Really?
How they kept their food, because we didn't have freezers.
No, but wasn't there a lot of canning going on?
Oh, yes, we did. In our basement, they had shelves special for, sure, tomatoes.
And you probably had a root cellar.
Yes, we did. That's where the fresh potatoes were kept, and the onions, different things that they grew.
And the carrots.
Turnips
And carrots, all those root vegetables.
That's right.
Yeah. Coming back.
How you forget.
Yeah. But the pressure cooker, Bob, you just mentioned. Tell us about that. Do you know that's coming back? They're advertising pressure cookers now. Of course, they don't look at all like the ones that we used. They look like something from outer space. But,
I
tell us.
never used one, but I remember my mother, somebody let her borrow one. That's the way things were then. The neighbors borrow this or that if you didn't have one.
Uh-huh.
How she used to, for putting up tomatoes, string beans, you know, cook them a while and then make sure you released the steam, I guess. You took it off and put the covers on and so
Before you
forth.
took the cover off, you better release the steam or you're
Yeah.
going to have a big surprise
Yes.
and an injury.
And I was told to leave things alone on that because cooking was not mine, and it isn't today. That's why I married her, to do my cooking for me. I can open a can, you know, and that's about it. And these modern stoves give me the old stoves that turn a button to on and the temperature you want. I remember the old kerosene stoves. They used to have like a 3-burner kerosene stove with a little, I don't know if it held a half a gallon of kerosene on the end with a gauge on it, and you knew when it was getting empty.
Really?
And
So growing up in the Depression, I mean, being a kid in the Depression, you really escaped all of the tragic details of so many people's lives because you were resourceful, self-sufficient with animals and vegetables and apples and whatever. And so you also probably, because there wasn't much communication, didn't learn about some of the horrors that people endured. So basically, your childhood must have been pretty happy.
Right, we really were. I lost my thought. Oh, when you were talking about the stove, we had a old black wood stove, and that went all the time in the kitchen to keep the house warm, because we didn't have heat on the second floor. I had 3 bedrooms, and so we had to put on long stockings and heat up some bricks on the stove and wrap them in a towel to keep our feet warm at night. It was the way we were brought up. But my grandmother cooked on the old wood stove, and every Saturday she would make the rolls, and they'd sit on the stove to puff up, and they baked the beans in the oven because it was for heat. So you did that for so long.
And that was Saturday night ritual in Massachusetts.
Right.
Bake homemade Boston baked beans.
With
And
the
brown
rolls,
bread.
fresh rolls.
And brown bread
Homemade brown bread.
with raisins in it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember when my grandson brought his bride home from Illinois, she had never heard of brown bread. I had made brown bread. Never. I said, oh, we have to have brown bread.
With our baked beans.
Right.
Yeah. I know my mother would get the salt pork,
Mm-hmm.
throw that in the bottom,
Yeah.
onion, molasses.
And your mother was a good cook, I remember.
You do. Yeah, my mother, Enid Larson Almquist.
Right.
She was such a good cook that when it came time for us kids to go to college, she said, I have to do some catering. And so she did. And she loved it. Other people loved it. And yeah, she was a good cook. Yeah. What are the values that growing up in Easton gave you that have lasted throughout your adult life and have impacted your choices in life? Maybe the things you're involved in, maybe the careers you took, and the paths you took, and it wasn't just from the schools, but also from the church.
Several of us girls in Easton stayed very close friends. We had our children. We would take turns babysitting each other's children when the need was, and we were all very close, and that's partly why we stayed there. We didn't know to go anywhere. We had traveled enough to know other places, but we were just this was our home.
Yeah. Now I'm thinking more about value, and that's so important, the friendships and helping each
Right.
other out. I mean, because back then, that was something you really did learn, isn't it? That you stick together as a community. It's sort of a family. The community is a family. You help each other out. You don't hide the physically or mentally challenged. They were always living in the house, and the other generations were there. They didn't go into nursing homes. They actually...
Right.
So, so some of those values of loyalty and caring and so forth, I think you've talked about enough to let us know that those were important to you and your families.
I remember the winter time, and the coal shovels, shoveling the coal onto the fire, and then late in the fall or early fall, you'd start having somebody bring some wood to you. You'd chop it up, split it, and so forth, and throw it in the cellar. And then you go down and stack it up. And I remember back when we used to get a good snowstorm, Vern Willis would have his horse, he had a snow plow, would pull that. It was a V-shaped plow and had like a wheel on it. You would take and turn it this way to widen it out or make it narrow, coming up Pine Street with it and going the whole length of Pine Street. And then the plows would come eventually, because the plow was on J.O. Dean's coal truck.
Wow, what a sight that must have been.
Yeah, you know. And then when we used to go out sliding, and then they used to come with them trucks with a little sand on the back and a guy standing on the back shoveling the snow out, the sand out
The
at the
sand
snow.
out, yeah.
And he got the snow back right at him. Hey, you're ruining our sledding and stuff down Pine Street. And then we used to go down High Street and Hill Street. And right across Turnpike, then you didn't worry about the cars.
No.
We had a lot of fun. Toboggans, put the sleds, hook them together, and get down those streets, and we had a good time.
So did you do any skating
Oh, yes.
in the winter?
Yes. I had a pair of skates given to me, and there was a little river. We called it the river. We used to call it Reams River. It went under the railroad tracks down there in Eastondale, and it would freeze solid. And the bridge was like made out of big slabs of granite. And we'd go down there and skate back and forth, go over to the woods near Simpson Spring, and we had what they call the frog pond. Walk over there and skate. And then we had our hockey games up on Dean's Pond, where that was a rough and tumble thing. But we enjoyed doing it, and we had a good time.
And it kept you healthy.
Yeah.
The sliding, especially down Pine Street past the house where he lived, was just enough slant down the hill, and they didn't plow like today, like he was saying. It was packed snow, and people had to have chains on their tires because the kids had to slide down Pine Street.
Sure.
That was a must.
Yes.
We also had a hill near the house where I live now. It was wide open at the time. There's a house there now, and the trees have all grown up. But it would go almost to 138, from Pine Street to 138. And the kids came from all around because there was plenty of room, and skiing, sliding, and tobogganing. That was the thing in the winter then, for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. For mine, sliding, my grandfather worked over to a farm up on Manley Street that they call Jerusalem Hill. And I used to go over there a lot to help him milk the cows and so forth, because he lived on a house across the street at the other corner. And of course, my grandfather worked there, so he got permission for us and the boys. The group would walk over there and slide on those big hills over there as you're going up Jerusalem Hill. And then that was a long distance to go, but it was the walking back that got you the best. You had to go back with that sled and then get up and go again. That was fast going down, but coming back, it was a chore to come back.
And did you come home to hot chocolate?
Of course, or chowder.
Oh.
Clam chowder.
Clam chowder, oh, the best. Yeah.
I'd walk over to grandfather's house, and they'd have cookies and hot chocolate for us.
Yeah.
So,
Wow, those
I
were the days.
still have the recipe from his mother's book that he said it was hard to make the right molasses cookies his grandmother made. But I do have one recipe from hers, the angel gingerbread with the blueberry gingerbread. I still make that, and that's the closest to what his mother made.
Great. Is it published somewhere?
No, it's written in her book. She has an old book with it. It's in writing.
Yeah, of course. Just the way they always did it. They put their favorite recipes in a
Right.
book.
So many they did without a recipe that they couldn't remember.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for all the stories and the growing up in Eastondale, and you have certainly led a golden life together. It's so evident to me when I meet you how much you love and adore each other, and I think that is one of the most wonderful thing to behold in today's world, where relationships are often too short, and people like to trade people in for new models and so forth. And you have enduring values that you shared, I think, growing up on Pine Street in Eastondale, which have really glued you together. What do you
We
think of
take
that?
care of each other. We rely on each other for our needs.
I tell people I see in the market, when I know how things are going, I said, well, you know, we live in assisted living now. They say, which one? I said, 91 Pine Street. They look at me, you're all wacky.
So you're assisted living, you're assisting each other.
Right.
Right.
Wonderful. And you're keeping the old fires
And
burning.
our children help us a lot.
And are you fortunate to have them nearby?
Yes, especially our daughter Nancy and our son Don are very good to us.
Oh, that's wonderful. Good. Well, this has been a very enjoyable discussion and sharing so many memories. And I want to thank you both so much. And I'm sure that the audiences at home has enjoyed this as much as we have enjoyed producing it today. This is Priscilla Almquist-Olsen, host of Growing Up in Easton, and my guests today, Jean and Bob Alger from Pine Street in Eastondale. I want to thank you for watching, and until next time, take care. See you then.